This is Rob Womack. I have come to you today to read the final chapter in the book that I've written, Jubilee, the Emancipation of Life and Love. I'm really grateful for those of you who have sat with me through this reading. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm glad to bring you this last chapter. Like the other chapters, it as well opens with an epigraph. This one by Wendell Berry from the essay A Native Hill that is in the book Art of the Commonplace. This is found on page 20. We have been wrong. We must change our lives so that it will be possible to live by the contrary assumption that what is good for the world will be good for us. And that requires that we make the effort to know the world and to learn what is good for it. We must learn to cooperate in the processes and to yield to its limits. But even more important, we must learn to acknowledge that the creation is full of mystery. We will never entirely understand it. We must abandon arrogance and stand in awe. We must recover the sense of the majesty of creation and the ability to be worshipful in its presence. For I do not doubt that it is only on the condition of humility and reverence before the world that our species will be able to remain in it. Chapter 7. A Turn to Face Shalom. Long before words, a universal ethic of care emanated like a still, small voice throughout the universe. Written translations were unnecessary. There was no separation, no names, no groups, no divisions. All was of one accord. The aperture of hearts and minds remain open, that someday humans may rejoin the fold. With profound sorrow, prophets and mystics agree. From our current vantage point, possibilities seem dubious. Since the 96th increment of time, multicellular beings on the unnamed planet now known as Earth have not experienced anything like ascension or paradise. In fact, through fits and starts, events have been quite difficult. In the short span of 4 units of time, elders, neighbors, siblings, and kin have witnessed 5 mass extinctions. Like a remnant, a few among them, including our oldest grandparent, have managed to survive. All stand as testimonials to the delicate fragility and steadfast resiliency of life on planet Earth. Once again, life and love replete with paradox. The 6th mass extinction is well underway. Many innocents have already perished. More will follow today. Some have never faced such a calamity. In recorded human history, no Noah has faced such a storm, much less survived any such as this. The resiliency of sapiens remains largely untested, completely unproven. As a harbinger of what lies ahead, the brevity of our closest kin, through seasons far less challenging, is far less than favorable. What should be even more disturbing is that if we do not alter our current manner of living, sapiens will be the next branch pruned. Due to our willingness to destroy so many threads of the web of life and love, we perpetrate the 6th mass extinction. We are the 40 days and nights of rain. Capitalism is the great flood. Catastrophe could yet be averted if we heed the information flowing through the universe to seek more harmonious relationships with our elders, neighbors, siblings, and kin. Though it lessens with each passing day, time still remains. Our greatest great-grandparent has been quite patient. Regardless of our choices, the good news is clear. Life and love will carry on, with or without sapiens. Our lives, such as they are organized around words, limbed into stories. Generated by the imaginations of ancestors long deceased, the stories have been handed down, adopted, and enacted by their offspring, which is to say, by us. The stories are as reliable, creative, and malleable as the human imagination. Such as it is, no more, no less. Our ancestors' stories filter and reflect reality with varying degrees of distortions and omissions, but they are not reality itself. Some of the most well-known stories go by titles such as God's Creation or the Big Bang, Christianity, Buddhism or atheism, capitalism, socialism or communism, competition for survival of the fittest, or a society of mutual aid. This series of organizing narratives is organized as well. The order helps to see that the stories we enact differ, sometimes dramatically. Therefore, to state the obvious, during a lifetime, choices must be made. We can choose with intention the stories we live out. Otherwise, our actions comply with choices made by someone else, ancestors long deceased or more recent contemporaries. Excluding situations of imposed dominance, compliance, like surrender, is an easy, lazy choice. But then, so is dominance. Courage, thoughtfulness, and effort are required to walk the middle path. Regardless of how or when, what we choose becomes the organizing narrative around which we can form our lives. The stories and beliefs provide the lens through which we perceive, interpret, decide, act, and interact with each other. Consonant stories, uniformly shared in truthful alignment with reality, are barely noticeable. On the other hand, stories which are incongruent within a single mind or where two or more are gathered increase the stress and dissonance. Furthermore, if our stories permit, accept, or encourage harm to others or ourselves, eventually many will partake in the suffering. The more fervent the belief in our chosen stories, the more factual their appearance. Hence, the more fervent our belief, the more difficult to distinguish what is actually real from what instead we think should be true instead. The greater the certainty, and thus the rigidity, the more stressful one's lived experience. The stress is felt most palpably at the junctures where learning could otherwise occur. Rather than sit with humility, reverence, and awe during the demonstrations of continuity amid change, we instead busily craft subjective stories moment by moment, generation by generation, based on our preferences, biases, and beliefs. Then we try to live them out as if they were one universal, unambiguous reality. The trinity of matter, energy, and instructions of the physical universe participates in a story as well. It is, I am, at one, ineffable, without word or name. More precisely, the physical, material, energetic, spiritual universe is a story in and of itself. The unified story has been dictated in a language, if you will, which most Euro-Americans have yet to learn, much less to adhere. The history of past and present is composed of an infinite multiplicity of data points. Their intricacy is far too complex for sapiens to comprehend. In response, our mental faculties habitually narrow the data to wring some semblance of meaning from select events as they unfold, but only where our attention and interest perceive events to be most meaningful. Those considered meaningless are abandoned to the mist. A Alas, the universe does not conform itself to anthropocentric narratives. Try as we might, to force upon it our preferences and limited understanding. For instance, the universe is a reality with neither beginning nor end. Such notions are contrived conveniences to accommodate the limitations of sapiens' cognition and short attention spans. The physical, material, energetic, spiritual universe cycles and swoons in long arcs of unending motion. Within this dance, we are mere bundles of surplus solar energy, coalesced into physical bodies, imbued with sublime spiritual consciousness. You are infinite. You are spirit. You are breath, a whispered echo of the eternal story, a divine utterance. You are a fractal of the totality of the universe. You are an opportunity realized in event, in action and non-action, in sound, word, and deed. We enact beauty and kindness, selfishness and greed, anger, power, and violence, or laziness, luxury, and neglect. Moment by moment, we freely choose deliberately, impulsively, or passively, for good or for ill, based on the stories we live into and believe. What we bind and what we loose, in heaven as on earth. With this in mind, let us note that humans are the only beings on the planet who use anything like money, fire, or imagination to sow separation, inequality, and suffering. An imaginative concept called ownership is the chosen barricade to withhold needs from one another. Another imaginative concept, money, unlocks the gate to facilitate their release. Fire is the primitive instrument used to perform more work at a faster pace than solar energy alone facilitates. Rents, interest, profits, and regressive tax deductions drain the coffers of the less fortunate. Current standards of commerce generate an inequality of suffering from the inseparable concepts of wealth and poverty, all of which began just minutes ago in the fractional units of the universe. The Euro-American story of fear, sex, violence, competition, and survival is the propaganda of masculinity run amok. Capitalism is the latest instrument chosen for the unequal distribution of wealth, poverty, privilege, power, and work. These are, if not its stated goals, the logical outcomes. If we continue to live by the ancestors' stories, they lead inexorably to catastrophe. We could continue to comply with the scripts contrived by Euro-Americans and economicus. We could instead rage, however briefly, at their paltry story. We could even go so far as to protest, boycott, strike, or die willingly. Alternatively, we could very quietly adopt an ancient story anew, which transcends the inherited scripts. Non-harm, care, and cooperation brought the web of life and love to its beauty and magnificence. They are the way of Shalom, the middle path home to Jubilee. Though some may be less than cooperative, even hostile to alternatives, our willingness to preserve, enact, and live into a story which saves the web of life and love would be unconditionally beneficial for everyone. If we choose well, persist, and inspire others, one day in the future, a more beneficent story will guide our offspring. The stories of rational self-interest, unlimited growth, and scarcity will become the dust of ancient history. Our suffering is generated and sustained collectively. for those who directly benefit from the inefficient distribution of material, energy, and work, to alleviate the suffering may at first seem like a grave sacrifice. However, once we are beyond the addictions to wealth and inequality, new relationships with work, money, and each other will not be experienced as such. Indeed, you may be one among many who wonder why we were not living this way all along. I hope you will allow yourself to trust those who have listened closely, blazed a trail, and reached the other side. This book attempts to preserve an original story which has been echoing for all to hear, for all who listen, for eternity. The Church of the Emancipation is one method among many to become at one with that greater story once again. Consider this little book your invitation and map, however partial and incomplete. We are grateful that you have come this far. One generation at a time, like braids in a long cord. If we cooperatively participate and persist, together we will make it there. The Jubilee, what some call kingdom, some heaven, all linguistic symbols for one reality, is the natural order of the universe in the here and now. Please, won't you meet us there? Be aware, it is not utopia. Pain, illness, and death still occur, conflict as well. They are simply a part of the process. Unlike here, however, such words hold no connotations of discomfort or fear. In the place we seek, conflict and struggle evoke compassion, curiosity, and creativity from love as plentiful as sunlight, gravity, and air. Indeed, such a place surrounds us this very day. Our arrival is much anticipated. The wedding ceremony has long been prepared. In light of our brief existence, to speak of such a reality may seem preposterous. We tell ourselves that human beings, central in the loving eyes of God and the universe, among all others supreme, are also innately sinful, selfish, aggressive, and lazy. The evidence some ardently point out is abundant. This is a quote. But not me, of course, not us. Everyone other than us, that is. We are the exceptions, exceptional even. They got what they deserved, and so did we. Close quote. It is often said, then believed. As if eavesdropping on a secret, under their breath someone murmurs, so what if we're no different? Better get yours first. No one wants to be a sucker. You can almost feel the smirk. The words which define divisions between us and them are completely arbitrary. Compare any large groups of human beings, and you will find more diversity within the group, including Euro-Americans, than between the two. In comparisons with our so-called true self, we tend to justify the imperfection of harmful behavior and mollify residual guilt with harsh self-judgment for not being more perfect already. Many Euro-Americans stubbornly subscribe to perfectionistic, black and white, or each to his own ways of thinking, all of which stunt curiosity, learning, and flexible responsivity. A practice of silence, non-judgment, and simple observation would help us to see ourselves more honestly. When freed of the misperceptions created by the inherited stories, we would see ourselves more clearly. In most hours of the day, most days of the week, most years in a life, the vast majority of humans tend to be astonishingly capable of good, trustworthy, responsible, and loving behavior. We tend to prefer to see ourselves and to be seen by others in these ways. Thus we act accordingly. If this were not so exquisitely true, what we have already accomplished would be completely unimaginable. Then, take a moment, if you will, to imagine the expansive possibilities of humans unshackled from violence, wealth, and poverty. But be aware, if you ponder long, the insight might inspire you, and the losses of the past will break your heart. Even more preposterous is our historical and contemporary willingness to harm members of our own species. From vantage points more sensible than the present day, our behavior towards each other would seem utterly absurd. This is most especially true in the irredeemable losses, such as the genocide of indigenous peoples throughout the Western Hemisphere, American slavery, the Shoah or Holocaust, atomic bombs detonated over the citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a war over political and economic ideologies in tiny Vietnam, and in Iraq, a war based on lies of threats that did not exist. All of the above were perpetrated by Euro-Americans. All would be considered crimes against humanity if men of authority were not positioned in roles of mutual accountability. Review by a jury of one's peers has its disadvantages. Among the perpetrators, only Germany's Nazis have been held accountable and an attempt at reparations made. In addition to these crimes against ourselves, the willingness to so casually accept lesser degrees of violence seems equally preposterous. Some examples include police use of lethal force and psychological harassment, mass incarceration, solitary confinement, and capital punishment, adult violence against children, male violence against women, financial coercion for the daily separation of parents from children, bullying and humiliation of subordinates and peers by persons in authority, and last, but far from least, intergenerational poverty. As a representation of conditions and events, this list is far from complete, but the image conveyed is clear. Arguably, the conflagration of mass psychosis that led to the atrocities listed above overwhelmed abilities to intervene. But these ongoing events are certainly within our power to end. Furthermore, these lists include only the harms we cause each other among our own species. They say nothing of the astounding willingness to harm the soil, water, air, and other beings upon whom we depend to flourish. Whereas the lists above, to the segregated mind, speak of varying degrees of homicide, our treatment of the web of life and love more closely resembles a form of mass suicide. The long, slow atrocity might be compared to a fetus attempting to abort its mother from the inside out. A strongly distasteful image, and yet, so apt. Lastly, our willingness to harm ourselves leaves the destruction of other beings on whom we do not directly depend to seem so thoroughly acceptable that it hardly merits a mention. Likewise, for any responsibilities we, as a species, may hold towards interdependence, to care for those who would otherwise depend on us, within our own species or others, we live as if oblivious. Sadly, it seems as if we have come to firmly believe that fear, selfishness, and destruction are intrinsic to existence. Such a belief was inculcated by the stories of our masculine ancestry and enacted by their offspring. Where we take them from here is entirely up to us. Fortunately, good teachers abound. Many live among us and quietly practice here and now. Their examples could guide us to learn the ways to care well for each other and ourselves. Some teachers have departed the physical material plane, while here they elucidated a multitude of variations on the universal ethic of care. Their wisdom remains here with us to be practiced each and every day. The original eternal story these teachers embody and share is ready to be adopted, lived, and experienced today. Much of Euro-American Christianity, on the other hand, has relinquished its responsibility to teach the daily practice of the universal ethic of care. Maybe the devil, a cunning expert in leveraging growth and endowments and debts, has gained the hold of its tongue. One day each week its members apply tourniquets to treat the wounded survivors, and then, during the 6 days to follow, they religiously attend to the accumulation of wealth and the distribution of poverty. Euro-American Christianity has not been highly successful in its ability to exemplify Christ-like behavior, nor for its ability to guide its flock to live as such. To the contrary, nearly everyone is convinced, by the church no less, that to live as Christ has asked is well beyond our mortal ability. This is yet another story, contrived by our ancestors and adopted by their offspring, as if it were factually, unalterably true. To again state the obvious, such ideas imply Jesus' faith in us was incredibly overblown. On the other hand, Euro-American Christianity has been very successful in its ability to attract and retain members and collect their tithes in exchange for an eternal promise of life after death determined on a case-by-case basis. In the meantime, until the promise is redeemed, an invitation stands to join a community of like-minded believers with mild demands. The good news, it is safe to say, is that the deceased appear to be 100% satisfied. Christ did not request the tithe of 10% to leave 90% on the table to spend as one wishes. Life and love gives itself freely and unconditionally. Paradoxically, it asks for nothing and the same, complete unconditionality, in return. It seeks our whole being, body, spirit, and mind, as if we were at one, without divisions or separations, so that we may love and be loved in return. Yet for the Euro-Americans to sell everything you own and give it to the poor seems at least as daunting as to love your enemies. And so we continue to live as if in exile far from home, as a bird with wings who never thought to fly, or was persuaded not to try. All material and energy have been freely given to be equally shared by all. Therefore, we could freely give of our work, service, and care to the best of our ability. No one need be disqualified from participation. If offered willingly, everyone's efforts would be graciously received. Our needs to thrive should never be withheld, especially due to age, ability, or poverty. Only the complete minimum of material and energy should be taken and consumed. Care for our children, elders, and dependents should be prioritized above employers, shareholders, and the so-called free market economy. Reciprocity, interdependence, and mutual flourishing could guide our decisions. In contrast to individual selfishness, the accumulation of wealth, privilege and power, violence and aggression, or laziness and luxury. Our interactions could demonstrate practices of care, responsibility, self-restraint, trust, courage, and faith. Choices are small. Each and every moment, each and every day, one generation to the next. Best of all, the choices are ours to make. until the body of Christ again finds its voice to lead by example, with or without its words. Inspiration might emerge from smaller entities, one person, one family, one friendship circle, one community at a time. Movements arise voluntarily. Personal decisions determine the method and the time. Otherwise, we wait for a government fiat or an undeniable catastrophe. Sooner rather than later is an imperative of many mystics, prophets, teachers, and survivors. Obviously, not everyone agrees. Some clearly prefer to wait until they are told, "Come, this way, yes, now, follow obediently, please." Others wait as well, but for the day when they hold the power to tell others when and what to do. If we all move towards one destination, let's name it Shalom. Arrivals would naturally flow from diverse directions and at differing speeds. Our circumstances vary person to person, family by family. If we travel too cautiously, the status quo will be preserved too long. Prior to arrival, life would cease. If we travel too hastily, unforeseen harms ensue and expedite destruction. In the incremental middle, calibrations alleviate stress through patience, trust, and equanimity. Pardon the redundancy, but it can't be said enough. Care for our children, elders, and those dependent upon us must be prioritized over and above any owner or employer, first and foremost. Building shareholder equity, accumulating wealth, and private property should never have taken priority over care for children, elders, and dependents. Current priorities are a holdover of the hierarchy of Euro-American masculinity. The consequences have been a profound travesty. In the near term, as consumers, we will need to adjust our expectations and patterns of consumption rather than to ask our children, dependents, and elders to continue to sacrifice on behalf of our privileges and convenience. A humble suggestion to begin. Start small. Develop routine practices to care well for ourselves. Healthy food, ample sleep, and ongoing learning would be a nice beginning. Moving outward, we can practice better care within our relationships, homes, and environment. Burn less electricity and gasoline. Travel fewer miles by airplane. Waste no food and eat less meat. Apply effort and energy toward work and careers more necessary and life-giving than lucrative in pay and benefits. Lower expenditures as much as possible. First in entertainment, collectibles, and all of the new and unnecessary stuff. And then, and more importantly, lower payments to rents, debts, and insurance. These practices facilitate the reduction in incomes so that access is more affordable for everyone. If personal income has reached the community's median, when you are able, go lower. Please, put your shoulder to the plow and pull. Finally, when you are ready, begin to divest excess savings to the lowest levels which feel safe, based on your age, the progress to emancipate yourself from the addictions to money, and our progress to meet your needs more freely. To gauge the timing, the early signs will first be noticed internally. More often you will feel trust and contentment as they displace fear, anger, and anxiety. Relations will be more reliable, isolation a fading memory. Externally, you will start to notice housing, health care, and healthy food become more easily affordable and available. People will speak less of increasing income, exorbitant prices, and the financial value of their property. Divestments will be generally distributed to relatives, neighbors, or strangers, with savings below the median. Consider these distributions as reparations, without the interminable weight on partisan legislators. You may be surprised to learn who is the intended audience for this book. It was not written to indulge the left-wing progressives who rail vociferously against systems of oppression, power, and wealth. No purpose is served by preaching to the choir, assuming, of course, that the choir has reorganized their relationships with consumption, money, and work. Otherwise, as humans are wont to do, we may find that the members of the choir simply point fingers and cast aspersions at disembodied systems. They hope the culprits will see the light, mourn their errors, and lead the way to repentance. In addition, when the solutions are left to recalcitrant culprits, we render ourselves small and powerless. Likewise, we mire down in a mud of our own making if we assume roles of oppressed victim with no imagination for routes of escape. Disembodied systems in need of change are comprised of human beings similar to ourselves. Their minute decisions, interactions, and relationships follow similar scripts. If the scripts which equate security with monetary wealth were rendered meaningless, maleficence would be neutered into impotence. If you happen to live near the so-called margins, please do not strive to be more like the wealthy and powerful who overconsume and destroy. Instead, as you are able, offer your ways to inspire and lead for the sake of freedom and generosity. You are closer to the Jubilee than you may realize, and certainly much closer than many have believed heretofore. By the Euro-American stories, we have all been deceived. You are the overwhelming majority. The self-centered minority must learn to come towards you. Therefore, we hold ourselves personally responsible to alter our relationships with money, work, and consumption in the home, workplace, and communities. Then, inspire others to adopt practices to care for the whole of the web of life and love. The looming flood called capitalism cannot be overcome while we try to maximize income, save for retirement, insure against unaffordable losses, and borrow enormous debts. This book, as you may have deduced, does not intend to win mass approval nor gain popularity. In fact, the audience for whom this book was written should be the most discomfited. To avoid any confusion or evasion, allow for this specificity. If you are among the 133 million people who reside in the United States with an annual income between $70,000 and $200,000 and or a net worth, that is retirement savings and property, in the black, this book was written for you. The more successful and the younger you are, please rise. We have empty seats in front. You are the 40% who provide the buffer which keep current systems functioning. Without your cooperation, such steep inequality and suffering would cease. The 50% below the median would rarely have their needs denied. In addition, the conduits to siphon wealth to the uppermost 10% would leak, then dry up. If you are among the upper 10% with your hand on the spigot and your buckets to overflowing, you are welcome to join us. When the front row is down to one seat left, your name will be on it, and the door will always be open. This book also addresses persons in positions of authority, whether in the home or our places of work. If you have the privilege and power to make decisions which affect the lives of others, such as children, customers, employees, tenants, migrants, prisoners, and citizens, you can continue to conform to the old scripts. You could continue to operate according to the harmful notions of the accumulation of wealth and inequality. Or you might put into practice more loving methods for an efficient distribution of material energy and work, all of which was freely given to be equally shared by us all. Lastly, this book is written for those who generate the narratives that we organize our lives around. Faith leaders, economists, scientists, journalists, artists, teachers, and others. The ideas we espouse and the words we put forth create perceptions, expectations, and experiences, one utterance at a time. The scripts collectively enacted emerge from the words that we choose and demonstrate with silent integrity. You are being asked to mindfully guide us in new directions. We wish to move away from the notions of individualism, wealth, and scarcity. Instead, help us to comprehend, embrace, and move towards reciprocity, equality, and flourishing. Your assistance is much needed and greatly appreciated. As a form of motivation, discomfort is extraordinarily helpful. If a path to relief is explicitly known and hope exists that comfort is within reach, most humans will hardly rest until comfort is achieved. Contentedness is our preferred baseline state of existence. The hope of prophets and mystics alike is that some of the reading audience are so perturbed off center that they must recalibrate to find a new equilibrium. In conclusion, let us consider one last story often told. It addresses the question, who are we innately, as individuals, as a species, down in our souls? If we were to imagine ourselves raised without the corruptions of the human economy and the narratives that our lives have been organized around, what would we as a species be like? At our spiritual, energetic center, as individuals, who would we be? To say we are innately good is far too vague. Like normal, weird, sinful, and bad, this adjective has become rather meaningless. Good persons, good schools, good neighborhoods, and good jobs all denote success and conformity with the scripts which perpetuate great harm. Being good, like nice, may be the near enemy of Shalom. Weak substitutes which surreptitiously undermine the actualization of wholeness, peaceful contentedness, and equality. On one hand, the good people who so politely adhere to the scripts handed down, who on occasion advocate for those less fortunate, make inequality and injustice difficult to uproot, possibly more so than the outwardly selfish and cruel. A meager 10% in charity upholds the stability of the status quo, mild temporary relief for which we are grateful, but no fundamental change in one person's misfortune or another's luxury. On the other hand, the selfish and cruel minority who unabashedly revere inequality and superiority stifle beneficence. They choose instead to organize around ideas of masculinity, private property, American exceptionalism, and white supremacy. When they attempt to justify, defend, and explain away clearly harmful, unjust ideas, attitudes, and behaviors, matters are only made worse, not better. At least it is no secret for whom they stand. They stand for themselves and little else. Instead, I ask you, are we innately selfish, aggressive, lazy, or neglectful? including or excluding people like yourself? If untended and uncultivated, do we go wild, spread like weeds, or wither? What happens if we are neglected and our needs are withheld? What happens to those who do the withholding? What happens if we are yelled at, frightened, humiliated, punished, and abused? What happens if such attitudes are doled out by strangers, by people we love, or those who are supposed to love us? Who or what do we become? If we are well cared for and attended to, if our needs for presence and sustenance are readily met by loved ones, neighbors, and the community, do we then become people of integrity, trustworthy, responsible, and kind? What if we allowed ourselves to finally see that life and love was like sunlight, gravity, and air, that all material and energy have been freely given to be equally shared? The answers are left to you to decide. And so concludes the chapter and the book. There is an appendix of luminaries. That's a set of bonus tracks at the end of this book. Quotes that would have been epigraphs had they fit. But they are remarkable and inspiring and insightful, and I wanted to share them with you. So for those who buy a copy of the book, you'll find them there. You can find the book at my website, which is the word equals, EQUALS, heal, HEAL.com. And there you'll find my website. You'll see a menu item for the latest book. And as of right now, that book is Jubilee, the Emancipation of Life and Love. Someday, that will change. Thank you for being here. I wish you many blessings. To you and to all those that you love, on this day and in all days to come.